What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more hardcore, and we're going to do a 2-for-1 in this one. We're going to listen to 2 tracks by Technohead, though separated by many years. Which is to say, Technohead was a very notable duo in the early days of hardcore music, and it was originally a male partner and a female partner who were actually partners in real life. Unfortunately, the female, I think her name is Lee Newman, she passed away from cancer in '95, so back in the original heyday of hardcore, they put out a couple notable tracks in those very golden days, and then, as I said, quite unfortunately, one of them passed away. The guy, I think, like Mikkel, I think is his name, he has continued to work on things over the years and came back and made some tracks in more recent times, including for the 200th release of Mokum. Mokum being one of the very foundational hardcore labels from the Netherlands in the early 90s. I think their first releases were like 92, certainly by 93. And yes, they're just one of the all-time classic hardcore labels, still putting out a lot of vinyl to this very day. So shout out to Mokum, shout out to Technohead, and indeed the track that we're going to listen to in the back half of this, called Hands Up, is a tune just by Mikhail under the Technohead name in 2019. So ultimately, it's a group that goes back to the early days. Now it is just carried on by the one surviving member. But ultimately, we're going to hear a remix, a 2019 Panama remix. And if I'm remembering correctly, Panama was the name of the venue for some big 200th release party that Mokum threw, which, you know, had a lot of the old school names like Chosen Few and Dano and so on, as well as younger folks like Peckerhead from the Netherlands, or not from the Netherlands, I think he's from Denmark. And yes, ultimately it's I think a venue, and so the 2019 Panama mix is a remix of the classic track by Technohead, I Wanna Be a Hippie. And I believe, you know, in 95 I still wasn't yet going to parties. I think 96 is when I first started listening to techno and trance and hardcore, and it was by the end of that year that I went to my first party or two, and then 97 is when I really started diving into it head first. So it was a little bit before my time, but if my research and current level of knowledge is correct, I believe I Wanna Be a Hippie, at least in the Netherlands, at least, you know, in a place where hardcore music was more known by mainstream music circles, it became sort of a crossover hit. I think it was played, you know, on radio and in places where, you know, it was not just in the sort of super underground gabber parties. So I think the original track is actually somewhat well known. And this 2019 remix is very, very similar. I've heard the original. I think it's a tiny bit faster, and I think it has some extra sections or interludes that aren't in the original, but it is very, very close. So let's first listen to Technohead and their all-time classic, I Wanna Be a Hippie, which is, as I said, the Panama 2019 mix. Which samples musical use past the Dutchie. Fast. And I love that haunting operatic vocal. nice, like, uplifting synth melody. Notice how quick it there's literally no gap between the two tracks, which, you know, as a DJ, that's not always the most convenient. Nevertheless, I get it. They were trying to pack as much as they could into this 200th release. So, yes, it's an all-time classic. Again, before my time, but once I started learning more about Mokum, again, like a little bit back in the day, but certainly since about 2015, 2016 or so, I've really begun to, you know, use Discogs and some other places, and eventually, you know, tapping into the knowledge of my good friend Roberto, aka Formek, aka Byron, and some other names. But yes, to learn more about the classic gabber as well as the early hardcore that people are making now, I do love those breakdown sections where it goes into that, you know, I want to be a hippie, I want to get high. Like, I just love the way the rhythm is in those sections and the way it sort of gives you a bit of a crescendo and then launches right back into the hardcore, like, proper sections. I will say it's very fast. Like, if you mix this with other tracks, you either, you know, got to speed up some other tunes or slow this down a little bit just so that you can beat match. Although, of course, with hardcore, you can do what I call, like, soft transitions where, you know, there'll be, like, a dramatic sample without a kick drum and so on, and you can use sections like that to bridge tunes and play them at different tempos, whereas if you're doing a proper beat match transition, you pretty much have to, you know, get them to the same tempo, either by slowing one down or speeding up another. But so now, let's listen to a track from 2019 by, again, one half of the original Technohead. I'm not sure, you know, I said Michael, it's like Michel, so that's why I'm saying it that way. Maybe it's just pronounced Michael, you know, sort of like the English language name, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure either way. But this one is called Hands Up, and I would argue that it's a more modern hardcore sound. It also reminds me a little bit of this genre that, like, in the early to mid 2000s, I think it actually, like, started, the first time people started using this word was in the late 90s, but jump style, which is sort of like if you mixed hardcore with a bit of a hard trance flavor, so it kind of has like a sped up hard style kind of vibe. Again, it's sort of a blending of some different flavors and stylings, but it is most fundamentally like hardcore, like the old school sort of gabber sound, but with a bit more melody and a bit just different of an atmosphere. So I believe this was a track composed originally for this 200th release compilation. It's called Hands Up, and it's by Technohead. So I didn't remember that sample just because I always mix out of the track by that point. So yeah, it's an absolute slammer. I say it reminds me a bit of jump style because there were some jump style tracks back in the late 90s, early 2000s that had that main sort of like almost like a banshee kind of singing type of synth lead. And so that particular element just reminds me of jump style, which I believe is originally like a Belgian style. And then a few years later, it became big in Germany, and I think it became more internationally known during that like secondary German phase. But either way, it's a rocking hardcore track. I actually prefer it to I Want to Be a Hippie, even though I think when people think of Technohead, they definitely think of the I Want to Be a Hippie tune. So yeah, I like them both, but I think on this entire 200th Mokum release special record, I think Hands Up is probably my favorite tune. I just love that, as I said, sort of creaking synth in between the Banshee synth lead sort of parts. So I like all the different sections. I like those breakdown sections. I like the way that it cycles through some different kick drums, including, like 4 with one type of kick drum, tweaking a little bit the next 4 with a different sort of kick drum sound, and then the final part of the measure with like another sort of kick drum sound. So I like the dynamic nature of the production over the course of the tune. So yeah, shout out to Technohead, both the original version and the single member who has carried on the name. Shout out to Mokum. Again, what do you say? Just a legendary label that still supports hardcore on vinyl to this very day, which is very important to me as someone who, I've dabbled a little bit with digital mixing, but for me, the real form of mixing, which isn't like an elitist thing, like people who do digital only mixing, including there's a lot of original producers and DJs from back in the 90s who've converted entirely to digital, so I have nothing against that. It's not an elitist thing. I'm just an old dog. It's hard to teach me new tricks. Everything about mixing on vinyl is very intuitive. You get the point that you want to cue up with like the needle on or the stylus on the actual record. You use your hand to slide it in, like to match up the beats, and like it's just all very in the moment and intuitive to me, whereas digital mixing, it's like this newfangled crazy thing. So yeah, ultimately shout out to those who still put out great hardcore and techno and trance and so on vinyl. It is very much appreciated. Let me know what you think of these two tunes. Let me know which one you think is actually superior. Ultimately, as I said, I think I like Hands Up a little bit more, but I get the mainstream, or not even so much mainstream, but I get the broad appeal of I Want to Be a Hippie. It samples a classic like reggae tune, as I said, Musical Youth and their Pass the Dutchie, and it just has a very like energetic and memorable sound to it. But yeah, for me, between the two, I'll take Hands Up. Let me know what you think, and I will see you next time. Peace.